Hello there and welcome back to the Libertarian Listener. On today's show I've got Damian Stephen, a political scientist, Marxist academic and satirist. Good to have you on the show there, Damian.
Hello there, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. First topic of business today is the Labour leadership election. On Saturday, Sir Keir Starmer was elected the Labour Party leader. Generally, I think the new Labour shadow team could be described as moderately left, very pro-Remain and fairly big states. What are your views on the new appointments there?
Yeah, well, it's nice to see that they've sort of got rid of the flag-waving communist types, I suppose, and the incompetent Diane Abbott. Apart from that, I have little interest in the Labour Party doing well, or the Conservative Party for that matter, so no strong opinions on any of the appointments. But Ed Miliband's back. We'll look forward to seeing more of him. I say between gritted teeth.
Obviously, Sir Keir has had a past in law, and he was at one time the head of the Crown Prosecution Service. According to the Express, under his leadership, the CPS failed to prosecute serial rapist John Warboys for 75 of his suspected crimes. It was also under Sir Keir Starmer's jurisdiction that the CPS failed to prosecute Jimmy Savile in spite of the evidence of his offending. What's your opinion on this?
As an academic political scientist, amazing how many texts are forwarded and edited by Keir Starmer, particularly turning to human rights in European Union law. Beyond that, we don't know too much about him. We know he was a keen Marxist student. Everybody left of centre was a Marxist student activist in some form. But he actually contributed articles, and he's a serious man who understands the philosophy of the left. He's someone on the left who clearly reads, which is nice to see. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, there was that whole issue with him saying he doesn't read, which was quite an alarming thing to say that didn't quite get the attention I thought it deserved. With regards to what the Express said, I've no idea the leverage that Keir Starmer had in the prosecution of Jimmy Savile.
Do you think that now that Sir Keir has been appointed, the Labour Party is now heading back to power?
Well, he's brought on some former shadow cabinet members, which he shouldn't be criticised too much for that, because obviously the results were pretty close. Does that show it's moving towards the centre? Well, to me, if the centre is defined by Ed Miliband and Blairism, then it's a move towards political idiocy. Although the thing about them getting rid of the flag-waving communist types and hopefully distancing themselves from some quite dangerous, radical and racist views is that these are left-wing people that understand the left and they understand Gramsci's idea of hegemony, the idea that you influence things institutionally and over a long course of time the political atmosphere and political ideas of a country change. These are people that seriously understand how to change political perceptions. Of course, Tony Blair and New Labour were very successful in that. They eventually ended up calling themselves, I think, was the political wing of the British public. And they truly understood how to move a country to the left, and it essentially warranted the British Conservative Party null and void, and they had to essentially adopt Blairism to get into power again. And that's through appealing and radicalising the BBC and the media. We're yet to see what grasp he has of the totality of Gramscian hegemony and keeping the party in order.
Well, he's up against history, isn't he? Because since the 1970s, Tony Blair has been the only Labour leader ever to win general elections. What prospect do you think he's got at the next election of taking down the Conservative government?
There is a big caveat over the whole issue with COVID-19 and what the hell that's going to do to the country, because we're living in an essentially socialist state at the moment. We're yet to see the army on the streets, but as the weather gets warmer and people increasingly ignore orders to stay home, that this whole issue may become much bigger. So that's obviously the big asterisk over this. Does he have a grasp of just what New Labour achieved? Another book I might mention is Norman Fairclough's New Labour, New Language, which is a linguistic study into how New Labour changed the way politicians speak and how they address the public. And the whole political system is under this lens of Blairism, and they still wheel him out. And occasionally they have wheeled Gordon Brown out recently for their remarks. And I think the British public, which has revealed itself to be very accepting of totalitarian measures, does in some way see Gordon Brown and Tony Blair as eternal spiritual leaders.
Do you think the more the Labour Party distances itself from Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, the less electable it becomes?
One issue is can it? If they can, and they understand political marketing, which while they had a huge media machine behind them ever since Tony Blair, it's become more fragmented. The idea of it being a broad church centre-left party obviously is disintegrated. as the internal structures of the party have become less democratic, and as radical factions have been allowed to have huge sway over the selection of candidates. I'm thinking here of the momentum, of course. The internal structures of how it deals with issues such as anti-Semitism, which it clearly has an issue with. It needs to tackle its association with Palestine liberation, all the different organisations associated with that. It has to look at its relationship and whether it wants to enhance or distance itself from radical Islamist groups such as Hezbollah and Hamas. All of these things are going to be very key to sort of becoming electable, but also moving away from Jeremy Corbyn, who of course brought the party to its worst electoral defeat, I think, since, was it 1940?
I think it was 1931, I think I read.
31, sorry. There's a whole cornucopia of issues it's going to have to deal with to sort of bring itself back to power. But it may be one of those issues where if the Conservative Party deals with the COVID-19 issues so poorly, and it currently is by closely copying the Communist Party of China, which is the closest model to what the British lockdown model is at the moment. So do they want to be electable? New Labour very much position themselves in the public as a government, not as a party. Market yourself as an actual government, because people will have faith in you. Well, rightly or wrongly, of course.
I think personally they're a very long way from that at the moment, and Sir Keir doesn't seem like the kind of person who will be capable of leading them back to power. Prior to his leadership win, Sir Keir promised to reverse corporation tax cuts, get rid of the university tuition fees, start renationalising mail, water, rail, energy, and raise taxes on the top 5% of earners. Do you think there's going to be any substantive difference in policy terms between him and Jeremy Corbyn, his predecessor?
Well, the issue with this, because obviously I have experience working with political parties, and I've done this, is that Sir Keir Starmer, as Brexit Secretary, as a senior member of the shadow cabinet, could not go out contravening Jeremy Corbyn and the party's policies. I imagine most of those things he was saying he didn't believe and knew that they would be very hard to achieve, would be far too easily defeated by the Conservative Party media machine. So it's just waiting for the veil to slowly be lifted.
I think certainly there's a comparison that could be made, because when Tony Blair took over the Labour leadership from John Smith, he actually inherited a hell of a lot of policy detail that had already been agreed to and retained a lot of it. So it certainly seems as though he's going to be retaining a lot of Jeremy Corbyn's things and merely augmenting them in a way that he sees fit.
The issue there is John Smith hadn't just been defeated terribly at the polls. And I imagine the new Labour movement within Labour, when it was in opposition prior to 1997, would have recognised and marketed and strategised and tested those policies with the British public and seen that they had some traction. Whereas Corbyn has been shown and has been embarrassed at the British polls. So there is that major sort of difference there to think about.
If you look at Keir Starmer's voting record, obviously he hasn't been in Parliament for very long. If you go on theyworkforyou.com, you can see a history of his voting record. There are certain votes that give you a sense of what kind of a person he is politically, and I have to say, looks very questionable indeed. So in November 2015, he voted against requiring a 50% turnout in order to make a strike ballot valid, and against other aspects of increased regulation of trade union activity. In December 2015, he voted against restricting the support available to failed asylum seekers and illegal migrants. In June 2016, he voted to allow the bulk interception of communications, equipment interference, and the retention and examination of bulk personal data sets, subject to certain safeguards. I'd imagine that's part of the Snoopers Charter. In November 2016, he voted against an investigation into the contrast between public statements and private actions in the run-up to the Iraq War. In November 2018, he voted against the proposed changes to the tax system that would have seen increases in the tax thresholds on income tax. And in March 2019, he voted against unilaterally guaranteeing the rights of European Union citizens in the United Kingdom. Is there anything there that particularly sticks out for you at all?
The inability to grasp the concept of democracy, which pertains to his attitude to the European Union. Who knows his financial interest in the European Union? He is a senior contributor and editor to European textbooks and things like that. So this goes back to another person I would encourage your listeners to read, which is Sir Edmund Burke, and his dialogue with Thomas Paine is incredibly interesting. Edmund Burke talked about the difference between the delegate and the representative model in democracy. This goes sort of back to the Platonic idea of philosopher kings, but he's definitely of the latter, the delegate model, and is completely overseen and is out of touch with what still remains of the democratic will of the British people and the will of the British people to have that recognised in law.
Obviously, Angela Rayner has been appointed as deputy leader of the opposition, which to me strikes a bit of a tokenistic tone.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing about the Labour leadership. It reminds me of the Malcolm Tucker quote where he's talking to the special advisors. He describes the cabinet in that as more women, more minorities with a lower average age than the Inter Milan defence. Which it's the same thing now, isn't it? It's just more women, more ethnic minorities, more diversity, more concern for social justice. Yeah, great if you like that, but most people don't, do they?
Well, yeah, and obviously in this particular instance, it's very dangerous. Angela Rayner last year at the Labour Party conference vowed to abolish Ofsted and said, quote, "I believe Ofsted measures poverty. It measures deprivation. It doesn't measure excellence." So in that statement, she's essentially trashing the hard work of school students all over the country by saying that their grades are effectively meaningless.
Yeah, this is all a great red herring from that big issue in British politics, which is the failure of the secondary school system, which obviously was introduced by Anthony Crossland. It does seem to be a bit of a red herring going down this rabbit hole of Ofsted's to blame. It's the egalitarian nature of the secondary school system that's to blame. It is fundamentally flawed that you have people of different abilities and different interests in the same class, because you essentially have to work at the rate of the slowest child in the class. And that's no disrespect to the slowest child in the class. There could be all sorts of reasons for that. It does penalise the more advanced students, the students who want to engage more. And for that sake, there should be schools that select on academic ability, which would benefit us spiritually, intellectually, and economically. And also, if you look at the actual figures during the grammar school system of working class accession into Oxbridge, you actually find that the figures are higher. So the secondary school system has failed in that regard too.
A classic motif of socialism is to drag everything down to the lowest common denominator, and I think that's certainly going to be the case if ever they
that's what
got in on the education policy.
Say about socialism. I don't think socialists say that themselves. Just to be fair to them.
David Lammy has been appointed as Shadow Justice Secretary. Now, this is quite a surprising appointment, considering that David Lammy is the same person who
it's not surprising at all. He's the more competent face of social justice, really. I mean, Diane Abbott, who knows why she was in the cabinet? People have their sort of tabloid soap opera speculations as to why she was in the cabinet. But David Lammy's, he's pretty much on it with the social justice and the BAME and LGBT community stuff, I suppose is the best way of calling it. So, and he's competent, and he understands it, and he knows not to wave the red flag everywhere when he does it.
But he doesn't exactly present himself very well, because he's made very bad comparisons between the European Research Group and the old racist rulers of South Africa, and also to the Nazis.
Yeah, well, this is true, but you've got to ask yourself, who in the political bubble cares? Do the media care that he's made issues of these things? Probably not.
Well, it's pretty damaging to his credit.
You're more than welcome to care, but the larger ideological goal of his beliefs and his party's beliefs are of much more interest to everybody. And for that reason, I don't think any of those remarks about apartheid will get brought up, or any of his other asinine remarks about other things, for that matter.
But it certainly is a stain on his character when he's referring to people who back a hard Brexit as promoting hard right fascism, when a quarter of his own party's voters in 2017 voted to leave.
Yeah, he sees the world in black and white, and this isn't just a matter about his simplistic brain. It's about he literally sees the world in black and white and figuratively, which is a problem if you see everything as good and bad and right and wrong, because there's far more nuance in things. The same thing with the Windrush Scandal. I mean, that was he milked as much as he could out of that to attack the Conservative Party. And while it was a failure of the Conservative Party, there's no doubt about it, it was essentially a bureaucratic problem and a matter of documentation and a matter of computerization of documents. As far as I understand it, it wasn't an institutional decision by the Conservative Party to be racist, which is how he sees it. It very seldom is as simple as that.
Well, do you think it's very dangerous then to have someone in the public sphere, in the political sphere, making incorrect assumptions about what is actually happening for their own political gain in the way that he has?
Well, of course it is, but all 650 of them do that, so that's not surprising.
His comments are particularly inflammatory as well. I mean, he says he slammed the formula of sending celebrities out on expensive flights to undertake charity work as perpetuating colonialism. It's so far off the mark.
Yeah, and he's got his head filled with all what's getting spread around contemporary academia, which I've been exposed to the last 5 years. Pretty simplistic, despicable Hegelian view of the world. Not to criticise Hegel, by the way.
He indirectly compared the now Prime Minister Boris Johnson to a white supremacist and said, I would pour whatever I can get my hands on an avowed white supremacist. Is that not an incitement of violence?
Well, maybe, but the issue is with David Lammy is he's built a career on being a great advocate of ethnic minority interests and equal treatment in this country, which in itself is a completely noble cause and something more people should be concerned about, in my opinion. But has he? Has he ever done anything other than incite racial conflict and racial distrust in this country? I don't think he has. I fail to see how he's actually contributed to the peaceful relationships between different ethnic minorities in this country. Show me the evidence, please. Every time he seems to open his mouth, it's inflammatory. He just continuously seems to fan the flames of conflict, which is a very tactful way to get into office, I might add. And far more dangerous people than him in history have done the same to get into office.
So, turning to other matters, what libertarian texts have you read?
There are different definitions of libertarianism, different strands and different opinions, and trying to keep the libertarian house in order, I suppose. I've read pretty much everything Ayn Rand wrote, Red Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. They're pretty insufferable novels, but the rest of her work's all the actual philosophical stuff. And if you can sort of wrap your head around that, you don't actually need to read the novels, which she says in her own words are the novelizations of her own philosophy, which then is objectivism. Published a dissertation on that, trying to link it to the concept of the nation state. But there are some major critical flaws in her philosophy, which means that you sort of arrive at junctures where if you set yourself up to do a philosophical explanation of an issue and then the philosophy is sort of unfinished, it can be very difficult to write. Added to that, I've got the complete collection of Thomas Jefferson's works, which is fantastically interesting because he's actually somewhat of a Machiavellian character, despite his democratic and liberal overtones, although he is still a Democrat and a liberal. Thomas Paine's The Rights of Man, the most important book ever written, the most important book about society, apart from the Holy Bible, of course, King James Version. Two Treatises on Government by John Locke. Most of John Stuart Mill stuff, the major stuff I've read. If there are any openly sort of, I suppose, libertarian texts that you can think of. Yeah. Because, I mean, there are things that are very important to read for anyone who's interested in politics. George Orwell would be another one. I mean, because even though it's not, his works aren't explicitly libertarian, they critique it and build a lot from it. Animal Farm 1984, Homage to Catalonia, that's probably the best book, I think. Particularly because it interests me, because I have a particular academic interest in totalitarianism. But then again, that's what 1984 is about.
So taking all that on board, how then have you arrived at your political beliefs?
I used to follow political scientists and, I suppose, intelligent journalists. I was pointed in the direction of a book called The Rights of Man by Mr. Thomas Paine. It's not necessarily a libertarian text, but it is the underlying philosophy of the United States Constitution and our modern concept of rights. And now we've developed from that a full set of human rights. I have a little bit of the issue with the linearity of going from the rights of man to human rights. At that point, I became then interested in Thomas Paine's greatest friend, which was Thomas Jefferson, who has some failings as a man, but is a fantastic lawyer, politician, and third president of the United States. And then I read the two books by Christopher Hitchens on both Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson. He was particularly concerned with the religious aspect of the founding of the United States. It became clear through reading Thomas Paine that I was led to a somewhat theistic belief, and also reading St. Thomas Aquinas as well, of the logical fallacy of saying there is no God, because if you trace it back through an analytical method, there has to have been something. It's not an argument for a creationist God or an interventionist God or anything like that. It's a purely topical notion that there had to have been something. Politically, my primary concern was social. Don't particularly claim to be an expert economist or anything like that. I'm particularly concerned with social and civil issues, and have campaigned somewhat successfully, I suppose, on things like that. Yeah. Well, that's how I arrived at where I am. But I'm always moving. I never consider myself to be in one particular area. People have said all these different sort of political homes, and they've said, "Oh, you fit in there." And I'd say, "Yeah, fair enough." But it's always been a difficult place to be. And I've given up anyway, because it's not necessary. And I'm not a partisan activist or a revolutionary, so I don't particularly see the need to have a named political identity.
So it's very much a single issue actor there.
I suppose so, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's the thing, because I've done political campaigns, and you get tarred with the brush of everybody else, and tarred with the brush of sort of the radicals. The European Union would be one example. It was an incredibly broad church campaign in the Leave camp. I suppose it was in the Remain camp as well. But I had my own reasons for doing what I was doing, and it seemed to be mine were far more open and nation state based and sovereignty based than other people who had concerns over things like immigration.
How does someone in your position move from one ideological perspective to another?
You know, I read a lot. I have to admit that I am quite a fickle reader, so I can read one thing and be very influenced by it, and then read something that has contradictory remarks. It takes a while to sort of amalgamate them and sort of synthesize your own view on things. Yeah, just reading, really. I also suppose there's a lot of tribalism in contemporary politics. I would say British politics, but it's true all over the Anglosphere and beyond. Removing oneself from seeing politics through that sort of lens, I would suggest trying to see past that narrow lens of the British Labour Party, the British Conservative Party as the only sort of vehicles for change. I'd say they aren't.
How easy has it been for you to transcend the stigma of your past political identities? Has it been quite easy to make the switch?
I suppose I've developed my opinions and try and combat them. But I've always had a core sense of principles. So where I've seen the advantage in whatever political campaign, I don't feel any obligation to stick with any political campaign, because the things that I want to achieve and the ways in which I want to improve this country and is something that transcends the individual movements themselves. So that's probably the best answer I could give you. Trying to achieve genuine human liberty, a real sense of justice. These things transcend the meagre world of politics. They go through to philosophy and Christianity as well.
Do you think that academia and the increasing institutionalisation of British politics has fueled the Westminster bubble?
You're saying, do I think academia has contributed to it?
Yeah, in the sense that it's feeding.
No. I think outside of senior historicists and pretty much worldwide known philosophers and political scientists, academia has absolutely no bearing on the realities of the real nit and grit of politics. And I've been in both worlds, very high up. And academia has, I mean, it's helped me understand it. It's certainly shaped my worldview quite considerably, and I can see that and understand it and see how it works in the real world, but there is no actual direct link or contribution from academia to the political bubble. Also, because academia as a concept, as an institution in general, is all behind a paywall. People say read more, learn more, but the fact is, if you want to actually read things about how the political systems work, about things like the Westminster model, you have to be in academia. It fails for the same reasons that I said the British Conservative Party and the Labour Party have, because it's self-interested. To that end, academia, I think, is somewhat content with its own mental masturbation, hosting its own events that only other academics attend. And if you look to the principles of the Enlightenment here for a second, when you look at all the advances that were made, the philosophical ideas were spread amongst the populace to everybody, and everybody was interested and everybody was engaged. Now it's not the same.
I suppose, like, going on from that, how can we reinvigorate the youth in an educational or academic sense? Because obviously nowadays you've got no platforming on campus, you've got very, very politically biased student unions. What measures could a future libertarian administration take in order to get rid of most of the grievances?
Well, this is where other movements could do with understanding. and reading Marxism, particularly Antonio Gramsci, as I've already said, is a key influencer. And he borrowed an idea from Lenin, which Lenin also derived from Marxist theories on the ruling class, called hegemony, or however you want to pronounce it. There's two spheres of influence on the structure of society: the political sphere, which is the direct political institutions, and the civil sphere. The civil sphere is everything other than government. So you've got things like the universities, religious institutions, trade unions, and the justice system. And Gramsci's idea was that consent for the current ruling system was reproduced in those institutions. As simplistic, and I think as flawed as that concept is when I'm defining it generally, he was onto something. And that was the idea that you could increasingly, through a long period of time, change the political perceptions of wider society by going into these institutions with an agenda and changing how people see this. You can completely remake the world over, which is a Marxist ideal. And then Rudi Dutschke, the famous green German student activist, sort of said the last political Marxist vanguard speech you'd ever need to make. And he coined a phrase that I'm sure you've heard before, which is the long march through the institutions. So this is similar to Winston Smith when he goes to see the inner party and he's presented with Goldstein's book. And Winston Smith is told that he will act and he will be told how to act, and it makes him pointless. He may not understand the wider link between what all these activists are doing to undermine Big Brother. This is the sort of concept that really Dutschke and Gramsci were talking about. En masse, if you have thousands, millions of academics, trade unionists, barristers, judges, and they all have a similar ideology, that of a sort of, I suppose, centre-left or a left-wing view, then eventually, once the old guard have gone and have died off, and eventually the whole of society will live and breathe the new ideology. If you speak to any earnest left-wing academic, same view to talk to you, they admit that's happening. It's not a conspiracy. So for libertarianism, or indeed even conservatism, or any, to be able to think for themselves and have a look upon the world that differs from the current institutional worldview, it's very difficult. And for that reason, I wouldn't sit here and pretend to give you a good answer, because you have to first contemplate that huge societal and cultural shift and understand it before you could ever try and change it.
If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. And that was from Animal Farm.
Yeah, and it's a shame, because there are good, honest, knowledgeable left-wing academics who enjoy the argument. But I think, at least in the last 25 years, certainly bolstered organisationally by the ideas of Blairism, was the idea of crushing opposition. And this is the difference between having an institution that's biased one way and teaching the way it teaches but accepting difference, and the difference between having dissatisfactory views towards differing opinions. And the sort of sinister underbelly of that. But then this is the part of one of the most basic axioms of Marxism is you have the power to begin the world over again, and it is a transcendence of Christianity and faith in that sense. So it will make people feel that they are gods, and gods have the power over men's wills. And to that sense, there is no crime being committed if someone with a dissenting opinion, their life and future is ruined.
All right, well, it's been great to talk to you, Damian. I hope you've enjoyed being on the show.
Yeah, it's been lovely.
I hope to have you back later in the series. It's been a very interesting conversation, but that is it for this edition of The Libertarian Listener. Join us again next time for more interviews.